Hi, welcome to the show. Today we're interviewing Pat Showalter, the City Council member for Mountain View. Welcome, Pat. Thank you for being here.
Well, Masu, it's my honor. Thanks so much for inviting me.
We love having actual people doing actual things come on the show and tell us, what they do, how they got here. So let's start with how you got here. What made you run for City Council a couple of years ago?
Well, I'd served on the Planning Commission for about 9 years and really been fascinated by it. And one of the things that I developed a strong interest in was affordable housing and increasing the housing stock. And it seemed like in 2014 when I ran, that had gotten to be a huge issue in Mountain View. So I thought it was a good time to step back up and see if I could run for council and make
win.
a difference.
Yeah, win. You got to win first in order to make a difference.
I did win, which was a very pleasant surprise. I came in first.
Excellent. Well, I don't think it was a surprise to everybody as it was to you because you did run a very good campaign and you had very good support, including from people in Mountain View generally, because they also see that the housing situation has become so incredibly fraught now, more than we've ever seen it. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I think that this problem has really been building for at least 40 years. We've underbuilt all over the Bay Area. And in Mountain View, we began to realize how serious it was in the 90s and set in place some mechanisms to start building affordable housing. That's particularly, the people who were having problems then. But now the prices are so high that pretty much everybody has trouble.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the signs that you're seeing that it has gotten this bad? Have you had problems that are being addressed in City Council, or have you had extreme incidents or any indication, graphs, that sort of thing?
Oh boy, we had just a groundswell of interest in rent control that started, I think it was September of 2015. We came back from our summer break, and there were over 100 people waiting to talk to us about the need for rent control. And they, we had people every few meetings. There had been 1 or 2 people who came in, but over that summer they got organized, and so we heard on a regular basis about the problems of people's rents going so high that they were forced to move out, or many families would move in together. And it was really heartbreaking to see. I remember one time, one evening we had a rabbi, a Protestant minister, and a Catholic priest come and implore us to pass a rent control ordinance. So yes, there was a tremendous amount of interest in housing problems, and that was one of the ways that it manifested itself in the last few years.
Yeah, there's of course other signs, but let's first address the rent control issue, because as a former student of UC Berkeley, when UC Berkeley had
I was
this little experiment, boy, did it go wrong in Berkeley. I'm sure you've experienced it too, but what ended up happening in Berkeley, as in a bunch of other places, is that it made the situation worse. It was not handled as well, and there was a housing shortage insofar as landlords just plainly refused to rent anything. So how is Mountain View going to avoid those pitfalls?
That's really a great question. I think one of the things that's really different about modern rent control ordinances, the ones that are being considered now, there's one in East Palo Alto program and now one in Mountain View, is that they're really much more balanced. They provide ways to make sure that the landlord can get a decent rate of return. I know as a student at Berkeley, I was a graduate student there in the late 70s, it was a very bad experience dealing with their rent control. And so when I was campaigning, I was very much against it. But I learned how a lot of research had been done and new programs had been put forward that were more balanced. And, you know, we're just starting in Mountain View, so we honestly don't know how this is going to play out. I think that you're going to have to come back in about 5 years and ask me that same question for us really to know, because right now we're just setting it up. But one thing that is good is that if you live in a rent-controlled unit, which has to have been constructed before 1999, so there are many that are newer than that. But if you live in one, your rent can only go up once a year, and it can only go up whatever the rent board says, which is basically probably going to be the CPI for the Bay Area, with a cap of about 5%. And there's some special mechanisms in there so that landlords can as needed, they might be able to get special permission to pass on 10%. But for most people, it's going to stay in that 5% or below range, which is much more manageable than it had been. We had the average rents go up in Mountain View over 50% in 3 years. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's hard to make a case that, wow, we shouldn't do anything about rents going up 50%, you know, year over year.
Well, that's exactly what the voters of Mountain View felt. And I think that we hope that this is a really well-crafted piece of legislation, and it will have the intended consequence. But as I mentioned earlier, these kind of things take a while to get set up and to get going, and I really don't think the jury's out yet on it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're updating it and learning from past mistakes, because we don't seem to have a lot of room to accommodate city councils making mistakes within their own city boundaries, because there's so much else going on, and the problem, just because it's been kicked down the road for, as you say, 40 or so years, it's finally, I think, hit a wall where we're getting hit with everything all at once, and the economy in this valley is just jumping, and so we just have problems at every level. It just seems like the only people who can get housing are the very, very wealthy, and then the seriously deprived, if they can get into some sort of public housing. But for everybody in between that, it's just one problem after another. What have you seen on city council that indicates that this is happening within your own city borders? Oh,
I mean, we hear anecdotes about it all the time, and we are approving a lot of market rate housing, and the reason is because it's fundamentally a supply and demand problem, and we need to increase the supply, and we're really working hard on that. I mean, Mountain View is planning to build housing in the North Bay Shore. You may have heard of that. That's the area, the industrial park on the other side of the freeway, where Google and much of the high-tech industry is in Mountain View, and we've passed a new precise plan there, and it's going to include up to 10,000 housing units. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So, it will be 20% affordable housing and the rest market rate housing. I don't really have any magic bullet to say, oh, well, that's enough to make the supply increase enough so that the prices will go down.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's got to help, and we think that it will be very important to have housing near people's jobs, because the other thing that we have a lot of problems with is traffic, and
Traffic.
And typically what people do is they move further and further away because the housing further away is less expensive. And then they spend just ridiculous amounts of their life in their car or on a bus or a train commuting. So the idea with building this housing close in is that many people will be able to walk to work or bike to work. And then, you know, say you have a couple that lives in the North Bay Shore, and, you know, one of them works for Google and one of them works in San Jose somewhere.
Yeah.
At least the person who works in San Jose will be going anti-commute direction,
Yeah.
and that will be better. So that's something we're working on hard, and then we also are working with developers to produce housing that's transit oriented in other parts of our community. We have a precise plan for El Camino that allows buildings to be higher than in other parts of the community. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to build apartments or condos there that, you know, that people can live in, and there's the best bus service in the county on El Camino. And so I know that's not necessarily high praise.
Well, any improvement would be most welcome.
So those are some things that we're really working on. And then, I mean, you normally do the Sunnyvale, right? Or the
Sunnyvalians, yes.
The Sunnyvalians. Okay, have to get the pronunciation right. The Sunnyvalians. Well, you know that these housing problems don't stop at anybody's borders. They're a thing we share. So we're one of the things I'm really fascinated by and working hard on is the Cities Association of Santa Clara County. That's an association that was founded I think about 30 years ago, and it gets together a representative from each of the cities every month to work on things of mutual interest. And you can bet housing is a thing of mutual interest, and we really try, those of us in the cities that are building and have some good examples, we really try and convince our fellow council members in other communities that indeed their communities will be improved, not harmed, by building new housing.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough sell because that's not the way people have been accustomed to thinking, and it might take a little bit of persuasion to get everybody on the same page, but it's definitely a regional issue, and it will stay a regional issue for some time to come. Unfortunately, we have run out of time
already,
even though we have only been talking about housing this whole time, but it's such a huge issue, and I'm certainly glad to hear that people on City Council are thinking of ways to fix the problem and the nuances of the various issues. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for serving on Mountain View City Council. Thank you for being with us today, and we will try to have Pat on yet again so that she can give us an update. Hopefully not as long as 5 years, but let's see how long it takes to get her back. Thanks for being here.
You know, another time, seriously, if you're going to